you are the general who is commanding all of your different troops, which are your limbs, to do things. And the more you can have your troops get a form of decentralized command in the sense that they have muscle memory through drilling specific actions. For example, my wrists have been wrist locked before. Have you ever done some rolling or live sparring in a Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu class against an upper belt and it felt like they knew every single move you were going to do before you even did it? Why is that? If you don't want to watch the whole video, essentially it can be summed up as they've practiced a bunch of different moves in a sequence, so they have pre-programmed responses in their muscle memory to moves that you have to consciously think about. However, I'm going to spend the rest of the video elaborating on exactly why that is. Let's begin with where everyone starts off in Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu or grappling or wrestling. Let's just say someone who has had no experience grappling before ever. They start off in the gym day one with no idea what's going on and absolutely no moves to rely on. Then they go to maybe a private lesson or two, maybe they just jump right into the class and they learn 1-2 moves. Hopefully, if the school is good, they'll learn it in a sequence, so it'll start from a position, maybe standing, and you bring them all the way to the ground and get a submission, and they know this one thing. And in order to actually do this on somebody who's resisting, you got to start with level 0 resistance and work up all the way to a fully resisting partner. And if you've ever been to a Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu academy, this is what you do when you're drilling. If you have a good partner, when you start, you'll do very minimal resistance and you'll just go through putting your hands and feet and limbs and weight where it needs to go and seeing how your partner reacts. Eventually, if you get good enough, you'll be able to ask your partner to give a little bit of resistance and you'll still be able to get the move to work. Now, you practice that enough times and you try it a few times in a live sparring situation and you'll start to realize that maybe the way you were practicing didn't quite have the same pressure or tightness or some little detail that, or big detail, that you're missing for the move you're working on to work on a live resisting opponent. So it takes all that time to build up moves that work on resisting opponents. And the whole time that you're drilling and you're learning these moves, you're also learning other skills surrounding the application of those moves. For example, you're learning how you could potentially set these things up. You're learning how you should be reacting if you're put in a bad situation. For example, if you're drilling side control pressure and a transition off of that, if someone is absolutely crushing down on top of you and you just sit there and take it, well, first of all, that sucks. Second of all, you're not being a good partner because in a live match, someone's not just going to lie there dead. But you'll realize that if you bring your arms in and frame, you can take a little bit of the pressure off. And that's sort of how you build up those subconscious routines that protect yourself. And I think that's essentially what happens over time in Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu is you drill moves long enough for them to become completely subconscious to where you can rely on them and you don't have to think about how to do them, and you can get that at a larger and larger and larger and larger scale. What I mean by this is if you start off with, let's say you want to finish somebody with a triangle choke. That's your goal. A white belt version of this would be try the triangle choke, right? Maybe we can say get to close guard, then try to shoot the triangle choke, right? That's step one. And then the whole time they're thinking, okay, which arm goes in, which arm goes out? How do I post my hands? How do I get my guard? All this stuff just to execute the triangle choke. And then when you get to the triangle choke, it's like, okay, how do I fix the details? Do I cut the corner? Do I turn my angle? And then squeeze. As you progress, it becomes less of thinking about where to put your hands because you've done it enough times, because you could reliably just tell your body do a triangle and you'll throw it up and you'll lock it down with proper foot position, with proper hip position. You don't have to think about it as much because you've done it enough times. So you've already got that aspect of it down. But on top of that, when it comes to setting up a triangle, you'll have all these other subroutines built up to get the person from standing to the ground. For example, when it comes to takedowns, you might have a series of 3 or 4 takedowns that you rotate between, And it seems like you're doing them super fast, but really you're just sort of chaining attacks, and then you have subconscious counters to the people you're going against. So if someone has shot a double leg takedown on you a bunch of different times, you'll learn instinctively that when someone shifts their weight and starts to set up the double leg, you need to be ready to sprawl. And if you're a newer person to Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu, you haven't seen that enough times, so you haven't been able to build up those subconscious routines. So you have these more complicated ways to set up the moves. I wouldn't even say complicated. I guess sophisticated. I mean, it is more complicated than just do the triangle, but it doesn't have to be overly complicated. It just has to be secured against any possible defense, and the only way you get that is by drilling it again and again and again and seeing where people get out, and then sparring and trying to go for that move again and again and again and seeing where people get out. And then when they start to get out, you realize that, oh, they turn away this way every single time, so maybe I should switch from my triangle to my armbar to the omoplata instead of triangle and just squeeze the life out of it. A lot of the times what makes the difference between a lower belt and an upper belt is the ability to chain attacks together and really switch from option A, option B, option C. And when the move you're going for doesn't work, it's not like, oh crap, my triangle didn't work, what now? It's, okay, so the triangle is not working in this specific way that I've seen before. Now I can switch to my other attack. And then this gets a layer deep where you can go, I'm switching to my other attack without even thinking about it because maybe I've specifically drilled transitioning off failed submissions, or maybe I've just done it enough times in a live sparring situation to where you can do it without even thinking about it. And that is the essence of getting really, really good at Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu, is building up these more and more complicated series and motions and patterns to the point where you don't have to think about it, to the point where you could go series A. I'm just going to make this up off the top of my head, which could be you pummel in for a specific set of grips, you snap them down in a very specific way, you get a ankle pick or whatever, and then you clear the leg and you go to side control with a very specific kind of pressure, you hand fight in a specific way to set up some grips, you transition to whatever finishing position you want, and you get armbar. I'm just making that up off the top of my head, but if someone has been drilling this enough times, they could say, Series 1, and it's just boom, 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 boom. And so they don't necessarily have to think about it versus someone who is starting off and it's like, okay, well, we're standing up. Okay, got to remember to keep my posture. Oh, he's shooting in, got to defend this. Versus someone who doesn't have to think about what they're doing as much. They can take that energy and transfer it into maybe more of a game plan, like overarching strategy, sort of like thinking about the game of jiu-jitsu as a battlefield, and you are the general who is commanding all of your different troops, which are your limbs, to do things. And the more you can have your troops get a form of decentralized command in the sense that they have muscle memory through drilling specific actions. For example, my wrists have been wrist locked before. So I used to have to think about really defending the wrist locks, and now it's like, okay, he's going for the wrist, I'm defending, I'm framing, I'm shrimping away, I'm doing the things I need to do to protect myself without necessarily thinking about it. And so instead of thinking about, oh crap, defense submission, how do I pull this back, whatever, what my limbs are doing is, okay, engage defense and just keep them away or pull them closer, whatever you need to do to defend. My troops, my limbs are off doing that on their own, while me, the general, is planning for, okay, it seems like my opponent has spent this much energy, I need to do this or that in order to reverse the positions. I've seen that they get weak here or strong here. Maybe I want to switch to this game plan or this specific series. And when you're thinking about those things, while at the same time your limbs are already executing automatic escapes, automatic attacks, because you don't have to think about them. It's a natural reaction to when someone puts pressure on your neck, you defend in a specific way. So it's that automatic movement that really makes you a much better grappler because it frees up your conscious mind to think about the other aspects of the game plan. And so when you're rolling with an upper belt, it's not necessarily that they know what you're going to do before you're going to do it, because sometimes they do. Sometimes you choreograph movements and it looks obvious. It's like, okay, this person's going to do this move that we learned in class 2 days ago or whatever. But more often than not, they're executing their moves automatically and their defenses automatically, and then they're thinking more about higher strategy rather than the specifics of where to place my hands and how to do the moves and how to escape and how to do all this. So instead of getting lost in the weeds of technique, they have the more aerial view of the entire battlefield if you want to call it that in this analogy, and so they can think more strategically rather than in the weeds of how to break grips and things like that. The next question someone might ask is, how do I go from a level where I feel like I'm just focusing on the nitty gritty, the how to get the triangle and how to get the correct angle, to focusing on the overarching strategy, the more battlefield aerial view approach of the jiu-jitsu match versus getting lost in the details of techniques? I'm going to quote Josh Waitzkin, a Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu black belt under Marcelo Garcia. He's also a multiple-time chess world champion and has a bunch of other accolades under his name. He wrote a book called The Art of Learning, in which he describes the process he uses to learn skills at a world-class level. And in one of these principles that he wrote about, it was called going into form to lose form. And what that means is you go into a very specific set of movements or strategy to free yourself from needing to rely on that. So if we're going to continue on this triangle choke example, if you only focus on triangle chokes for, say, 80% of your submissions, you're like, I just have to get the triangle choke. If something presents itself and it's like beautiful or whatever, I'll get it. But most of the time, even if it looks like I could get something else, I want to finish the triangle choke. If you focus only on that and you drill a few different setups to only that specific thing, what you're going to find is you're going to see it in much more places. You're going to start to get triangles without having to think about it. And you're you're going into the form, you're practicing the form, you're drilling and you're doing the sequences and you're doing the same thing over and over and over again, and really drilling down on the narrow specific techniques on how you move your hips, how you squeeze with the pressure, how you lock your legs up, and all this stuff. To then you start to leave the form in the sense that your body can now execute this triangle choke automatically. It can do setups automatically. When you have setups that your body executes automatically, you're like a wizard, because what you can do is you're already programming your opponent by shifting their weight forwards and backwards or tricking them, and then you set up into the move. That's when you get really, really good, is when you're setting people up automatically. And so if you continue to practice this, you'll get to that point where you set people up automatically. And if you can focus on one thing and get really, really good at that, it doesn't have to be like one thing, but it has to be a more narrow focus than just going to all of jiu-jitsu. Now, you might want to have about 6 months of jiu-jitsu under your belt, get over the first great filter before you really focus on one thing, because you got to like learn all the basic positions or whatever. But after about 6 months, if you pick a specific submission or series, it doesn't really matter what it is, and focus just on that, you'll be able to get really, really good at setting that move up. And you'll get to the point where you can leave the form because you've practiced it so much that now when you're in that specific series, you can be the general focusing on strategy. You can be the general saying, okay, his arms are locked in this way, his posture is this way, which means I need to make this transition, instead of just focus on pull him down and execute the move and get the tap. So that's how I see this. If you stuck it around to the end of the video, thanks as always. You've already supported the channel by giving me the watch time. Additional support can be done below with all the YouTube stuff, liking, commenting, subscribing. But you've heard enough of me talking. Thanks for sticking around. Peace.